There are Pokemon that are good for many generations from the moment they are introduced, and there are some that are only good for their debut gen, assuming they're even good at all. We never really know if a Pokemon is going to be good going into the next generation or not. And it's all up to what new Pokemon and mechanics get introduced, how the metas around them change, and if said Pokemon gets the buffs that they need to keep up, assuming they need it. Some Pokemon we think are going to be banned forever, like Mew. And then some fall to UU after years of relevance, and we begin to realize that we're old, like Garchomp. Today, we're going to talk about Pokemon that were introduced in the first 5 generations that have held up really well over the course of history and are still very good even more than a decade later, assuming they're available in Scarlet and Violet. So buckle up as an old man talks about old Pokemon and how back in the day, this is what we had to deal with, and with even less tools to deal with them. You think Landorus is used a lot now? Try being there for gens 5 and 6, buddy. Remember, always fear an old man in a profession where people die young. And also remember to like and subscribe if you like these types of videos, because there are plenty more of them to watch on this channel. Also, I'm live on Twitch again, I'm playing Fire Emblem Echoes, Luna's World, I'm writing a book, Lo-Fi, y'all know the drill. Also, if you missed the VODs, Mystmagius. So that said, let's get started. Man. Speaking of Landorus, they took away Defog, Toxic, and Knockoff from it and still wound up being good. Stuff wasn't looking great for it at first because he was walled by Great Tusk, which is the most common Pokemon in OU. That base 145 physical attack wasn't cutting it because you were basically forced to run Terraflying Terrablast if you wanted to hit one Pokemon. But that one Pokemon is the most common Pokemon ever, so you had to adapt. And adapt it did. Landorus fans realized that this Pokemon had base 105 special attack and access to Grass Knot and Earth Power, which hit Great Tusk, and still hit Goldango and Kingambit, and also would go on to kill Weekend Gouging Fires and Raging Bolts in DLC 2. Combine these offensive tools with excellent utility like Stealth Rock, Rocky Helmet, and U-Turn, and you'd find that defensive Landorus is back to being the top 10 in usage. And Terra has been suspiciously good for it, because it can Terra out of all 2 of its weaknesses, and that makes it potentially even scarier. People were hardly using it, and he nearly fell to UU. But it turns out his falloff was greatly exaggerated. You see, physical attackers are balanced by a lot of things, right? Intimidate, burns, iron defense, and body press namely. There are things that can nerf physical attackers into the ground, and basically completely shut down their game plan. Special attackers, in the meantime, are not restricted by any of these things, and have nothing that lowers special attack or cripples the stat in any real way. Special attackers are quite literally kept balanced by the existence of Blissey. That's it. Blissey's special walling prowess is so insane that Game Freak never thinks to do anything about any potentially powerful special attacker, because if it becomes too prevalent, you will just use Blissey to wall it. Don't believe me? Blissey was like RU, I think, back in the day, and then Ursaluna Blood Moon happened and dominated the tier, and suddenly, everyone was using Blissey to beat it before it got banned. And now, even without blood in the format, Blissey's still somewhat common because what else is going to switch into powerful special attacks from Heatran, Walking Wake, Raging Bolt, Darkrai, and Enamorus all at the same time and get up free Stealth Rocks? Short answer? Nothing. Stealth Rock, Thunder Wave, Seismic Toss, and Soft Boiled is all it needs. Ice Beam and Heal Bell are all accessories, and the heavy duty boots letting it bypass hazards is better than leftovers, which says a lot. Natural Cure letting it switch out and remove toxic poison is the icing on the already amazing cake. Dragonite is another Pokemon who since Gen 8 has had their existence defined by the ability to go to Hibbett Sports, buy some shoes, and become even better than it already was. Sure, throughout Dragonite's life, it had some rough generations. But once Generation 5 hit, it went from worse Salamence to better just about everything. Multiscale with any way to remove hazards from the field is a drug. And then, once Heavy Duty Boots got released, it didn't even need hazard support. Come in, set up D-Dance, and win the late game outright is an absolutely mortifying strategy. And the best part is, it completely works. I have played and watched many games where Dragonite was kept in the back until the late game. Once anything that could remotely threaten it was gone, and then all it had to do was use Dragon Dance once, and any sort of counterplay was blasted into oblivion. Outrage, Earthquake, Extreme Speed, Roost, Terra Flying Terra Blast, the rare but definitely impactful Hurricane to hit Great Tusk, all of these are excellent options, with the most notable in recent memory being Terra Normal, because bro thinks he's Arceus, and he's kinda right. So, originally, this was going to be a Clefable segment, but as I sat down to try to write about Clefable, my brain turned to mush as I had to sit there and try to come up with some sort of unique spin on how to explain this beautiful, adorable creature. So instead of talking about Clefable, I'm going to explain why you should use Blaziken, because I haven't given up on it being physical Espathra. So, hear me out. Swords Dance and Bulk Up are really good moves. It literally has speed boost. Your Terra Flying Acrobatics after losing your air balloon is absolutely insane, as it is guaranteed to kill defensive Tusk after a Swords Dance. Close Combat and Flare Blitz are spammable to some extent. It has a good Goldango and Kingambit matchup. It also threatens Rillaboom, Ribombee, and Kyurem, if not forces out their Terra. Guys, where are you going? You've got to believe me. This Mon has potential, I promise. Come back. So, Weavile is absolutely bonkers, and has been since it was a concept. Its weakest gen since introduction was Generation 5, and that's because fighting types were more common than the cold. Gen 4, it was the Pokemon you slotted to beat Salamence, Latios, and Garchomp before they got banned. Gen 6, Knockoff got buffed, and anything that wasn't a Mega was suddenly not wanting to come in. Same with 7 and the added Z-move users. And then in Gens 8 and 9, when those were outright removed, almost anything ever could be knocked off. And suddenly, Weavile's stocks went through the roof. Until it lost Knockoff, where it dipped drastically, only to get Knockoff back and have an insane resurgence. Low Kick, Triple Axle, Knockoff, and Ice Shard all make for a rather devastating set of moves, and more ambitious players can play Swords Dance to try to sweep the late game. This Pokemon is also a frequent at the shoe store for reasons I don't need to explain. If I need to explain this to you, please watch Dora the Explorer and pay attention to the monkey's name, and it might remind you of something pretty important. Heatran has only ever left OU once, I think, and it was during Gen 9 when Ogerpon Hearthflame was allowed in the tier. And not just beat Heatran thanks to Moldbreaker, but also just beat the entire metagame as a whole, bludgeoning it to death with Ivy Cudgels and Power Whips with its Terra, letting it basically have Intrepid Sword as an ability. Alas, once it got rightfully banned, Heatran came back with a vengeance. Terra Grass and Flying have added whole new dimensions to its game. Being able to finally stop the 8 ground types from banging at your door, trying to sell you the dirt they found as a euphoric experience. Lava Plume, Stealth Rock, Earth Power, Taunt, Flash Cannon, and Protect seem to be its most consistent moves. However, real gamblers know that Magma Storm is one of the greatest moves in the game, despite the fact that it'll only ever miss when you use it, and always land when the opponent does. I don't make the rules. Admittedly, while I am glad it no longer gets toxic, I do miss the days where it got Eruption, because Scarf Eruption was my favorite set. I like big numbers. What can I say? Superior has been quite literally excellent since Game Freak remembered they were supposed to give it Contrary, and then they finally delivered on that promise. Now, this stupid, slithering, storm-spamming snake has terrorized every meta it has been in since. And I find it to be, quite frankly, one of the most annoying Pokemon of all time, despite how great the design is. Sadly, the optimal way to use it, while technically a sweeper, is a sweeper of which I find to be, for lack of a better term, cheap. The riveting gameplay loop of Superior is sub on a switch, get lefties, hit glare on the mon that came in, get lefties. Hit sub, get lefties, and then rinse and repeat until the opponent eventually loses exactly one turn to paralysis. In which case, congratulations, you may have won the game. It's sub, glare, Terra Blast, or Hidden Power, depending on the format, and then Leaf Storm. That's usually the set. Sometimes there is variance, but that's what you'll usually run into. What I hate the most about this is that not only does this work, but Superior also deters hazard removal, namely Defog. Because if you use Defog and Superior comes in, it gets an evasion boost from the move. And that means that its sub and glare strategy is even more valid. What fun and exciting gameplay, I tell you. Skarmory has one of the deepest, most nuanced, layered competitive histories of all time since its debut gen, and has always found a way to be good in just about everything. It's probably one of the greatest singles Pokemon to ever exist, and, luckily for me, the reasons why it was good are incredibly easy to talk about. Before the physical and special split, the only things that could remotely damage it were fire and electric types. And even when it didn't run spikes in Gen 2 due to not getting it, it had a very solid toxic stall set. The moment it got spikes, its career was set in stone as one of the hazard setters of all time, and usually the best at it. Add Stealth Rock and Roost into the equation, and then Body Press later down the line, and Skarmory would become known as a mon that was simply managing to keep up despite the many years of power creep trying to take it down a notch. Even without Toxic, nothing gets chip damage in like a Skarmory set that uses Stealth Rocks, Spikes, Roost, and Roar/Whirlwind, and that is a damn fact. Well, okay, not a complete fact. There's a very real chance that there is a Pokemon that gets Stealth Rocks and Spikes and got to keep Toxic in Generation 9. And while it may not have Roost anymore, it just has better leftovers. Yeah, Gliscor is, it's Gliscor. Getting to use Toxic on your potential checks, switching out, being able to Terra out of all 2 weaknesses you have, getting to set up hazards like Rocks and Spikes, getting to basically be immune to knockoff so long as you already got poisoned in advance, being able to use knockoff, and then Swords Dance and Earthquake too? Yeah, Gliscor isn't just the king of getting chip damage off, having basically dethroned Skarmory in this role, but it's also a lot more versatile thanks to the aforementioned stuff. You know what Skarm is usually running. Other than exactly Protect, you typically have to figure out what the Gliscor is on. And if you figure that out too late and lose your check to it, you've lost the game. It is what it is. Volcarona was so excellent, it got banned twice in the same Gen 9 because it kept breaking Terra. You never knew what type it was gonna be. And while you knew it was always on Quiver Dance and Fiery Dance, the fact that it could run just about anything else it needed, while you also straight up could not guess what EVs it was running at all, making it a giant question mark that needed immediate solving before you ever sent out your first Mon, yeah, Volcarona was broken. Volcarona has always been broken. Gen 5, it abused gems. Gen 6, it abused nothing. But in Gen 7, it abused Z-moves. Gen 8, it abused heavy-duty boots. Gen 9, it's abusing boots and Terra. all while having excellent literally everything. And what really adds further insult to injury is that if you tried to use a physical attack to bypass Quiver Dance, Flame Body procced. Nice plan, bozo. There is no planning versus a Volcarona in Gen 9. There is just praying. And praying on Showdown is not a viable strategy. Otherwise, I'd never miss Play Rough. All in all, there are a lot of Pokemon that have aged incredibly well throughout the generations. People say that new generations are new power creep, and this is very true. But there are some older Pokemon that are veterans in the field of battle and just cannot be replaced.